Hello, I'm Mbweha. You can call me Ben of Team Relentless, and this is a meta snapshot. And today we are going to be looking at the data from the Las Vegas Open 2022. And our purpose here is to see what we can learn by looking at what a bunch of other people just played in a major tournament. So without further ado, let's get started right away. So the link to this spreadsheet is in the description, and what I'm going to do here is I'm going to walk you through the four major areas that I cover in this synthesis page, and then briefly walk you through kind of where the data is itself. So this event, again, Las Vegas Open 2022, it's January into January this event took place. There were this many players there, 90-something, 92 players, and that is the breakdown of the faction. So here we're looking just at the data from the first day. It was a 3-day event, and you can see that Empire and Droids were just a little bit more popular than the other factions, but not by much. It's a pretty good split of the demographic. Maybe a little bit low on clones, but not crazy at all. It's still 20%. So yay, that looks balanced and good. And then, a note about sample size. So 92 players, that's not a huge sample. It's big enough that I feel comfortable calling this a meta snapshot. But when we compare this to like the Invader League meta snapshots, it's way fewer games, right? So sprinkle some salt on this data and the takes that I have and that you may glean from the video and from the data. And remember, always think about what your sample size is when you're looking at data, because there's more anomalies with the smaller data sets, of course. All right, so that's that. If we look at the win rates of day one right here, we can see that they also look pretty balanced and good, right? So everybody sticking pretty close to 50% with their win rate. Empire players dropping a little bit lower with their ratio of wins to losses, and Droids just a touch higher, but nothing crazy at all. So that's, again, a really I apologize if you were hoping that you were going to watch this video and I was going to say this game is broken, because the data doesn't support that. So that's kind of where we're at right now, but we'll continue on here. Another piece of data that I was interested in looking at is how many of the lists were able to go 3-0. So on day one, everybody played 3 games, and anyone who got a 2-1 or 3-0 record advanced to day 2. But before I just looked at the advancement rate, I wanted to say, hey, what was the 3-0 rate? So there were 5 droid players that were able to go 3-0. And that's great, and 4 Empire players, which is a slightly higher 3-0 rate than clones or rebels saw. That's not like mind-boggling necessarily, but I thought it was interesting to kind of look at which factions were more consistently able to consistently win is what I'm trying to track that. And again, it's only 3 games with 92 people, so that's definitely where the sample size, put a little asterisk next to those. When we look at the acts and the bids, we can see the average activation for across all factions was 9.5. So deviating from that, clones just a little bit less than normal, and then rebels tended to bid a little bit deeper on average. When compared to the global average of 9.5. I'm saying bid, and it's acts, and I apologize. So anyway, clones having slightly fewer acts, rebels having slightly more, but an average acts of 9.5 for looking at all the factions on day one. I think that's surprising to me. I would have expected, in the past we've really seen more of a push in the last year towards high activation lists. And the fact that now people are skewing more towards less than 10 acts is surprising to me. And that certainly has to do with certain list archetypes, which we're going to go into later, that we're seeing come up. So surprising, different, not what I expected, which is, it's always good to go into these and say, what did I expect? What expectations were met? What expectations were not met? And try to figure out kind of why. And this makes me wonder, am I behind on the hotness? And it very well could be. But anyway, so those acts are a little bit lower than I would have expected. The bid, the only thing I'm really going to say is I think maybe indicative of a problem would be our average bids here. So we went from bids in Star Wars Legion being on average, way too high. I was running 24-point bids and stuff like that because of the way that defining the battlefield worked. And that's not good. So basically, blue player was too powerful. And now the average bid was only 2.75. And that would indicate to me that now blue player isn't powerful enough. So the bids are, I think, in my opinion, they're too low. And I think that somebody else suggested this. I'm not going to take credit for this. It was Archimedes suggested this. He said, if they gave the board edge, I think it was Archimedes. If it was somebody else and I'm giving credit to Archimedes, I apologize. But if they gave board edge selection back to blue, I think it would balance it out. And I totally agree with that. I think that doing the 4 card flip pretty much solved the problem of having way too much of an advantage with objectives for blue player. And now we're seeing that giving the bonus of board edge to red really has disincentivized people from bidding. So it was kind of ironic if you watched the, I don't know if it's actually ironic, but if you watched the stream that Yavin Base did of the final, one of the players was wearing a hat that said, make red player great again. And I would say it has been done. Sorry for whacking the mic. I'll edit that out so it doesn't blow up your eardrums. Okay, so that's day one, looking at all 92 players and all 3 of their games. We're going to scroll down, and now we're going to focus just on the players who advanced to day 2. So I'm still looking, this is still data from day 1, but only looking at the players who advanced to day 2. So these are only the people who went 2-1 and who went 3-0. So that would be this many people, 46 people advanced. And looking at the advancement rate, now we're starting to see some differences, right? So now we're seeing, whoa, droids did advance at a much greater rate than other factions. Droids and clones really fared considerably better. And rebels, if everybody is robots, each of these numbers would be like 50%-ish, really about pretty much half the players from each faction would advance is what you would expect. So kind of compared to 50%. And you can see the Empire players advancing at a lower rate than expected. That's interesting. And it's especially interesting when you take into account the win rate. So when you look at the win rate of these advancing lists, you see of the players who advanced, Empire players who advanced from day 1 to day 2 had the strongest win to loss ratio, and yet the smallest percentage of an advancement rate for a faction. So again, small data set, maybe, I don't know if it's a sample size issue, but that would sort of imply that the Empire players who are doing well are doing really well, but on average, Empire players are not doing as well as the other factions. So maybe that would maybe imply that it's harder to run Empire lists successfully, but once you figure it out, it's like a learning curve issue. And there are a ton of people who are running Vader, and all Force users have a high learning curve. So it could have been something like that. Or at a more recent tournament, I can't remember where, I think Vader Triple Dudes won it, or they did really, really well, or something like that. And so there were a lot of Vader Dues lists. Well, just because one person wins with a list doesn't mean that you're going to win with that list if you haven't practiced it and haven't figured out how to use it well. So there's certain factors that make me go and scratch my chin about that. So the win rate here of the factions that advance for the players that advance, I do think that's kind of interesting to see those differences there. Oh, and last time I did a meta snapshot, someone mentioned how I mess with the scale on the y-axis, and they accused me of manipulating my data to try to yes, I mess with the scale on the y-axis to try to emphasize certain differences. So I'm not trying to trick anybody with what I'm doing. Just FYI, if you're looking at that and you're being like, that interval's only 5%, but over here that percent is... Yeah, that's on purpose. I'm just trying to show you that it's the same reason why the conditional formatting has the colors coding things certain ways. I'm trying to draw the viewer's eye to differences that we can look at, some of which are somewhat significant, some of which are less significant. Okay, the 3-0 rate of the advancing players, you can see again that the highest rating for Empire and for droids here. They did quite a bit. The players who advanced really kicked butt with Empire and droids. So that's interesting when you look at it like that. Especially remember that Empire did so well in day one. It's a foreshadowed hint. I'm going to scroll up a little bit, so prepare your eyes. I apologize. Just real quick, we saw that overall the average axe was 9.5, but advancing lists, the average axe was 9.7 pretty much. So slightly higher number of axe on average for people who are advancing. You can see everything but clones above 10 on average. And then for bids, again, that average bid for everybody was 2.75, but the average bid for advancing players was 2.95. So players who advanced did have just a slightly higher bid on average than the players who did not advance, is what that means. And you can see the most significant bid coming again from those Empire players. These Empire players who advanced to day 2 seem to be on to something with what they're doing. Maybe they figured something out that many other Empire players haven't figured out based on the trends that I'm seeing there, but I could be wrong. I'm open to being wrong. Okay, we're going to scroll down now. So let's look at day 2. Day 2. So this is those same players who advanced. They went on and they played 3 more games on day 2. So it's a smaller pool of players. And here we see what day 2 looked like with a smaller percentage of Empire and Gar players and a large... Really what happened is that the droid players there were a little bit more of them to start with, and they were very successful on day 1, and so they take up a larger piece of that pie chart. Just fine. Nothing too crazy, I think, here with the distribution of players. I don't think that's unhealthy that a third of them are droids on the second day. That's fine. The win rates here, though, we start to see, whoa, big differences. We see that the win rate of the Clone Wars factions are higher. And 60% compared to 40% here is something to spit at. The other ones, maybe not, huge differences, but you're seeing that the win rate of like clone players was significantly better than the win rate of Empire players on that second day. So this is the other thing. So I said earlier that the Empire players who advanced from day 1 to day 2 really kicked butt on day 1, but then on day 2 we see that they didn't kick so much butt, and none of them went 3-0, which means you had to go 3-0 on day 2 to advance to the top 6 for Sunday for day 3. So what does that mean? Well, for one, it's a small data set. There are only 10 Empire players. I'm going to mix in a little bit of I try to mostly just keep this about, the data that we're looking at and the meta-analysis part, but I can tell you, as someone who's been playing pretty exclusively Empire online for a bit, I really prefer playing Rebels, which is funny because I play a lot of Empire online especially. But regardless, I will tell you that the Empire list that I run does really well until it comes up against really experienced players, and I hope that doesn't sound disparaging to anyone. It's certainly not my intent. What I mean is that when I run like an Iden tactical strike list, it can surprise players who haven't seen it very often enough to win me the game. But if I play against someone who knows to pre-measure well enough to deny me tactical strike on turn 1, I'm in trouble. And when you get to the day 2 of LVO, you're going to have a lot of players who can do that sort of pre-measuring. Now, that anecdote about Iden does not apply to this LVO data because there were only 2 Idens total all weekend. And so that doesn't really apply. But in general, if you've got a strategy that is good at taking people by surprise or good at taking people unawares or focuses on capitalizing the errors of other players. When you come up against players who aren't going to make as many mistakes, or who can see what you're trying to do, they know what's up, it's a lot harder. So that's my read on that. The information about the axe and the bid is the exact same as what we just went over, because it's those same players, FYI. So what we see here is that the 6 players who advanced to day 3, 1 rebel player, 1 clone player, and 4 droid players. I believe the final was between... I didn't put day 3 data in here because, again, sample size way too small to look at only 6. If you're interested in kind of deep diving into those 6 lists, I'm going to go over kind of like the overall list archetypes and show you some of the lists. But if you really want to look at kind of a summary of the 6 lists, Archimedes, Kyle, wrote a great listicle for the 5th Trooper. And so you can find that on the 5th Trooper network, and kind of get if you're really interested in focusing on what those top 6 lists were, I would go there. A note about macro data, which is what this is. Like, we're looking at a bunch of data. I know that Bushfax is going to put more stuff out, and I believe some other people have been kind of putting things in the Discord too, which is great. So, don't just look at the data I've compiled, look at other people's stuff too, always with the intent of like, what can I learn? How can I get better? So, that's what I have to say about that. Let's look at the archetypes. If you happen to remember looking at the archetypes, the list archetype information from Invader League, the last video I did, that was a meta snapshot, I had a lot more archetypes. And what I found was, looking at the LVO stuff, with 92 lists instead of like 500, and with so many more units available now, it was harder to categorize things as being like, Mall B2s. There was just so much more nuance in the lists that I couldn't do that. So instead, what I did is I categorized every list as, I said, does it have force users? Does it have a melee focus? Does it have a gunline focus? Does it have a vehicle focus? And in almost all cases, you basically, if you categorize, if you think of the game as, you can have a list that's got force users, melee heavy, gunline heavy, or vehicle heavy, basically pick 2, maybe 3. Pick 2 or 3 of those is basically what you can include in a list. So if you're thinking, that's a lot more than 92 right here, Ben. Yes, because lists were able to be classified as being both melee heavy and gunline heavy. For example, if they put enough points into melee units and enough points into traditional gunline units, then I counted it as both. So that's why that is the way it is. We can see that the frequency here, force user is incredibly popular, with 62 of the 92 lists having force users in them, 51 of the 92 lists having what I considered to be a melee heavy focus. That means that they had like 3 melee focused units or more. So if, quite often it was like, Vader and 2 or more dewbacks, or OP Luke and 2 or more Wookiees, things like that. Darth Vader and 2 or more IRG. If they only had 2 units, I usually didn't count it as melee heavy unless those 2 units were both hero units, representing a significant point value in their army. Same thing with gunline. Gunline, and to be counted as gunline, you've got to have enough points sunk into heavy weapons and shooty stuff, and having lots of units that do shooty things. And then vehicle heavy meant having any number of like heavy vehicles. Pretty much I called vehicle heavy, unless you only had like one. I don't think anybody had like one ATST and then the rest was gunline or whatever. But if you had, several vehicles in it, I didn't count things that only had 2 support vehicles. So if someone was running just 2 Staps, I didn't count that as vehicle heavy. That's not enough points invested into vehicles for me to consider that to be vehicle heavy. So I was expecting a lot more heavy vehicles and a lot more vehicles that focused on bringing armor, and I was wrong about that. People didn't do that, and I wonder if other players may have expected that, and so they brought a bunch of impact gun lines. I don't know. The number, you're going to see the number of, I'll show you here in a minute, the number of Magna Guards with RPS rocket launchers is insane. By far the most used unit, I believe. That or the DSDs. We'll check here in a second. But so yeah, that's what we see. Now, how successful were those? Win rates didn't matter. As far as just looking at the wins and losses of these, that's just to show you that, like, wow, that none of these lists were more successful in their overall win rate when you look at all 92 players. I didn't break it down for just the players who advanced. You can do that if you want to. I didn't want to. The advancement rate, though, we do see something that's worth noting, I believe, which is that the vehicle heavy lists did advance to day 2 at a lower rate. What I would call significantly lower rate. None of the others, these don't strike me as very significant. Maybe the melee heavy list only being 45% of an advancement rate, but I think the real significant thing is that there was what I would consider a significantly lower advancement rate of vehicle heavy lists. And that's what we saw when you look at the top 6 lists. I think one of them was vehicle heavy because the clone list had a saber tank, but I'm pretty sure that was it. Well, unless they had triple. Well, we'll check if we want to. Unless they had triple DSDs. Okay, so that's my overall synthesis analysis. Make of it what you will. I want to quickly show you. If you go down here and click on data by hand, you can see my source data. I'm going to make it kind of tiny. I apologize. This is how big it was when I was working with it. So I know this is that's too small for you to read. So this is just briefly, I'll do it like this. I had, again, there were so many different types of lists. I had primary, secondary, and tertiary archetypes just for me to kind of keep notes on what the lists were. Ooh, every player is linked to their list, by the way, which I'm glad I took the time to do. So every player is linked to their list. You can have every single list here is at your fingertips. And then I classified them as if they were, if they had force users, melee, gunline, vehicle. I also kept track of R2. I didn't include it in the synthesis because there wasn't anything significant to report about that. Yay! That means they balanced it correctly. So R2, I think, is in a good place. It's he's not in every rebel and clone list, and the lists that had him didn't significantly outperform the lists that didn't, or anything like that. So that's good. That's a good sign. So yeah, let me zoom back in just a little bit so you guys can actually read what I'm looking at here. I've got these so that I can sort them. This is a public spreadsheet, and so what you can do is if you click here and highlight the second row, you can go up and create a temporary filter, and then you can sort things however you want. I've got day 1 wins and losses, day 2 wins and losses, if they advanced to day 2, and if they made it into the final for day 3 is summarized here. As a side note, spoiler alert, Kubone won, and that means he went 3-0 day 1, 3-0 day 2, and 3-0 day 3, which is chef's kiss, outstanding work to him to go 9-0 over the course of the weekend. Of course, he's the only player that did that, which is why he won, which is great. So his list, as a side note, Maul Kalani with 6 B1s, which I considered it a gun line because there were heavies attached to it. If someone just padded their list with B1s and didn't put any heavies in it, I wouldn't have counted it as a gun line, as a side note. With a double ion, I did not count that as vehicle heavy. That's really part of your gun line with a double ion there. So you can see here that those top lists it was very popular to have Magnas, double ion, DSDs. We had the Yoda Padme Saber Tank, and then Opie Lucan Chewie Vet gun line, which was well done, Bushfax. It's a very unique list to take in, which is great. So if you wanted to sort by different things, you can sort by different things. If you're like, man, I really want to know just what the droid lists were, then here they are. And if you're like, man, how many droid lists I want to sort the droid lists by their primary archetype according to Ben. And you can see there was only one AAT, and then you can see Cad Bane and Kraken, and the ones that had Dooku. One person brought Dooku Grievous, and so on. There weren't very many generic super tacks. It was mostly a good split between Kalani and Kraken. If you're curious, well, how many people brought Kalani versus Kraken? Press Control F to search the sheet. type in Kalani, and you can see, oh, 4 people brought Kalani. How many people brought Kraken? Oh, 9 people brought Kraken. Oh, so it was more popular than I thought, than I remembered. It's a good way to quickly check. There's some sad things in here, like if you search for Rex, it goes, nope, nobody played Rex. Search for Boba Fett, nope, nobody played Boba Fett. If you search for, let's see, the Gav tank, nobody played the Gav tank. So that's interesting. When we say that no one played these things, it's important to remember that that means that we have no data about them, other than the data that says that they weren't popular enough to be played. That's what that means about those. So every once in a while, I was posting this data kind of as I was collecting some of it to hype LVO. I'm gonna switch back. You don't need to keep looking at this. I'll let you look just at me, and then I'll wrap up here. I posted some of this data over the weekend. There was some discussion in different groups about it, which is great. I loved the discussion. But I just want to remind people that like this data is, I put it out there so that people can try to learn from it. And we see what's popular. We see what's working well. We kind of see the state of the game. If you want to search for information in this data that you're going to use to just complain about, I encourage you to be cautious about the way that you talk about that, because we can say we all like this game. That's why you're sitting here. If you're still watching right now, you've been watching me for 26 minutes rambling. If you care enough about this game to be watching right now, then you want it to be a good game. And of course, we all have ideas about ways that we can change it and improve it, but there's a big difference between saying the game's broken, this is horrible, and saying, I wonder why we didn't see any wrecks. I wonder if that will be the case in the next big tournament. I wonder if people are sleeping on something. I wonder if AMG needs to make some adjustments. I wonder if his points need to come down because they made his cards less good. And we could say that about the Gab, and we could say that about a lot of other units as well. Where's Boba Fett? In the Sarlacc pit. He hasn't made it out yet. Couldn't find that rebreather, and he didn't make it out. And it's my headcanon for where Boba Fett was at LVO. He never made it out of the Sarlacc pit. So, alrighty, that's my hot takes and my friendly community advice. I hope that this was informative to you. I hope that you find more interesting things in the data as well. I hope that you discuss, and I hope that you have a great rest of your whatever time of day it is. So I'm Mbweha. You can call me Ben of Team Relentless, and this has been the Meta Snapshot from 2022's Las Vegas Open. Take care.